Hey there, art nerds! I've got another super easy watercolor bookmark tutorial for you guys today. So hopefully you're ready to paint a sea full of fishes. Grab your paints, grab your papers. I'm so excited to share this one with y'all today. So the materials for today's tutorial are a little bit different from what we're used to. We're working with a scrap of watercolor paper. I recommend using a cotton rag scrap of watercolor paper. I'm using Canson's Moulin de Roy here. We're also going to be using MT's white washi tape. I have a pencil with pink color lead. We're also going to be using some Saran Wrap or cling film. I've got my favorite brightly colored watercolors here, including some neons and pastels. We're also going to be working with masking fluid. I would really recommend you go with removable masking fluid, and mine has been applied to a Dinky Dips that's a little bit easier for me to apply. I've gone ahead and secured my bookmark using the white washi tape on all four sides to our plastic Coroplast support. So this is just like those plastic yard political signs. You can also use chipboard if you want. This is just to prevent our bookmark from curling up and buckling as it absorbs water. And I'm using the pink color lead to sketch in some fish shapes, mostly so you guys can kind of see what sort of shapes I'm working with and what sort of sizes I'm working with. So one of the cool things about pink color lead, this is a Japanese lead. It's a softer lead, so you want to be a little bit more careful when you're sketching with it. But one of the cool things about color lead is that when you put water on top of it or alcohol markers on top of it, it basically dissolves. So this is not going to be visible in the final bookmark. I've changed the lighting a little bit just so that you guys can see the fish that we're drawing. I'm using a really basic fish shape for this, but if you want to get more detail, please feel free. This bookmark tutorial is part of a series of really simple watercolor tutorials that create some really pretty art that don't require any drawing skills or draftsmanship abilities, because I don't want whether or not you're able to draw to stop you from falling in love with watercolor. So I am starting by doing a graduated wash of bright, brilliant colors, starting with yellows and oranges, working my way down the paper, adding new color while the first color is still wet. So this is pretty common for most of my watercolor bookmark tutorials. So you guys should have this down pat. And if you're interested in those other watercolor bookmark tutorials, I'll have them linked in the cards, in the description below. So while this is still wet, I've picked up a few different really bright greens with my brush, and I'm just kind of dabbing them in. So we're doing a little bit of wet into wet techniques here to get some interesting color variation and patterns to our fishes. And for every layer that I add, I'm gonna do something a little bit different each time so that we can play around with a bunch of very easy watercolor techniques. So once my paint has had a chance to dry completely, utterly, and fully, I'm actually gonna repencil my fish shapes, mostly so that you guys can see what I'm doing, since this is a little bit more of an unusual shape than some of the other ones we've covered in this series. And then I'm going to go ahead and mask off my fish shapes using my masking fluid. So if you're new to masking fluid and you're looking for some tips, I'm using Winsor & Newton's removable colored masking fluid. So it's the yellow tinted masking fluid that makes it a little bit easier to see on white papers. And you want to make sure it's removable, because Winsor & Newton makes non-removable masking fluid that will permanently adhere to your paper, and the bottles look the same. So you definitely want to check for that. But I've tried a few different masking fluids, and this is the one that I find I have the most success with without it tearing up the paper. paper. Now, not all papers are going to be masking fluid friendly. So for today's tutorial, I really recommend you work with a paper that is. So Stonehenge Aqua is pretty masking fluid friendly. Canson's Moulin de Roy is masking fluid friendly. Arches is masking fluid friendly, but Shizen and other handmade watercolor papers are often not masking fluid friendly. I'm using a synthetic watercolor brush that has a bunch of brush soap worked into the bristles, and that's going to prevent the brush itself from absorbing the masking fluid and it ruining the brush. And then as soon as I've applied the masking fluid, I rush over to the sink and I wash it out totally so that we don't have any latex still in the bristles. So I've allowed my fish to dry, and now we can get started on the next layer. So similar to the lens flare bookmark, we're going to be playing around with color development and glazes through layers of color. So it's a really simple technique that can have a lot of impact. So I'm basically doing the same thing I did with the prior layer, where I'm doing a graduated wash going down the page. I'm starting with orange and working my way to reds and pinks and purples. This time, my little something different is I'm sprinkling some kosher salt so it has larger flakes onto the still wet watercolor. You don't want to sprinkle it into pools of water. It's not going to work so well, but you want it to land on damp paper. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to push the color away from the salt flakes, leaving kind of white snowflake or white floral looking patterns. And it's a fun way to add some texture pretty easily. So you guys can see what it looks like while it's still wet. We have seasoned our fish with some salt. I'm going to allow it to dry completely and fully, and I'm going to use a drafting brush to remove the salt over a garbage can, and I also use my nail to pick away at any leftover salt that might have adhered to the paper. Once all my salt's been removed, I'm going to go ahead and start masking off fish using our masking fluid. So if you guys are wondering about that little suction cup that it's in, I purchased this from Oblique Love Letters on Amazon. I'll put a link down in the description below. I am really happy with this thing. I did a short where I talked about it, and it's just meant to hold your dinky dip steady while you work, so I don't have to worry about it accidentally getting knocked over and spilling masking fluid all over my table. So this thing is pretty cool, and since it's made of silicone, it's gonna last a while. I've cleaned off my small ceramic plate, and now I'm going to start working with some blues. And I'm going to do a graduated wash of different blues from top to bottom, kind of insinuating like sunlight through the water. So we've definitely got a sea full of fish here. I wanted to make sure that I made that progression from light to dark pretty clear. You can work with whatever colors make your heart sing, but since I'm doing an ocean full of fish, I wanted to make sure that I worked with blues, primarily cooler blues, and working my way even into blue greens to really sell that kind of underwater appearance. And even just from this first layer where we haven't even removed our masking fluid, you can really start to see the schools of fish start to become more apparent, start to come alive. And that's one of the reasons these really simple tutorials are so fun. It's like magic. So now we're gonna pull out our Saran Wrap. I'm gonna remove kind of a thin strip of it, kind of crinkle it just a little bit so we get some interesting wave-like patterns, and put it onto my still wet watercolor paper. And what this is going to do is it's going to create kind of a wave-like texture on the paper surface. So I'm pressing it down so it's actually touching and affecting the paint. That's what we want it to do. And I'm going to let this dry completely, and it's going to take longer to dry because we do have that plastic wrap kind of affecting evaporation. So I put it in the same room as my dehumidifier and left it alone for several hours. Once it's had a chance to fully dry, I'm going to very carefully remove our Saran Wrap, and you guys can see the interesting, almost tie-dye like pattern that it's left behind. Texture can be a really fun way to add some liveliness to your watercolor. So every layer of fish we do as we adjust the color and as we get darker is those fish are gonna be more and more in the background, whereas the fish we started with are brightest fish that are not kind of obscured by other fish, those are gonna appear to be in the foreground. So I'm doing one more layer of little fishies, smaller fishies this time, on our bookmark. And I'm also doing one more layer of our blues. And this time I'm starting with a phthalo blue, and I'm going to be working much darker, from phthalo all the way to indigo, with a little bit of neutral tint and black at the bottom, so that we get that really dark bottom of the sea abyss sort of color. We're gonna pull out our Saran Wrap again, and we're gonna do the same thing we did before. Now, if you don't wanna do this with a bookmark, if you wanna do it as a postcard, as a standalone illustration, whatever, feel free. I'm using these as bookmarks because when I'm cropping excess paper off my watercolor illustrations, I have a tendency to stash it so that I can use it for projects just like this. So for me, this is kind of a stash buster. I don't have to feel bad about throwing away expensive cotton rag watercolor paper, and I get to play around with some fun techniques. So for me, this is a win-win. But if you like what you see and you want to do it on a larger scale, or you need more room to work, or you want to do it as a postcard or as a card so you can send it to somebody, feel free to modify this as you wish. And if you found this tutorial to be inspiring, if you made art based on this tutorial, I would love to check it out. You can tag me at Nattosoup, N-A-T-T-O-S-O-U-P. It always means the world to me when my tutorials help inspire you guys to make art. So I'm using a masking fluid pickup. You guys can find these almost anywhere, but if you're having trouble finding them, I will have this and everything else used in this tutorial linked in the description below. They are Amazon affiliate links, so that means that buying from those links helps support this channel, and it doesn't cost you any extra. I think that's a win-win for everyone. I'm carefully, I know it seems like I'm rushing, but that's just because we're in hyperlapse. I'm carefully removing our masking fluid to reveal our ocean of fish. And what I really love about this is, other than some patience and other than some time, this was a really simple tutorial with a high impact. The end result is so cool, it's so colorful, and it was so easy. So once it's had a chance to fully dry, I remove my masking tape, pulling away at a 90-degree angle so that if it tears, it doesn't tear into our illustration. And we are just about finished painting our sea full of fish. How cool was that? This is an easy one. This is actually one that I'm gonna modify a little bit so that we're using wax resist, and I'm gonna teach it to my younger watercolor students. So that's another reason I've been doing these tutorials, is so that when I'm doing watercolor basics classes, I've got some fun but super easy projects that really showcase what makes watercolor so cool and exciting. So I had a lot of fun painting this with you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys learned something. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot to me if you left me a big old thumbs up to tell me I did a good job. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I hope you enjoyed this. I'd love it if you hung out with me some more. I make a lot of watercolor drawing and comic tutorials here on the channel. So it'd be great if you hit subscribe and click the bell notification so YouTube lets you know when I update. And finally, huge, ginormous thanks to my amazing patrons on Patreon. Their support over the years is what makes tutorials like this possible. Thank you guys so much. I couldn't do it without you. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye guys!